Hello, this is Resource of the Week with SolanoConnex, Mental Health, Service Access, and You. My name is Valentina Kelly.
And I'm Elena Starr. And this week we're meeting with Riva Mullins, LMFT for Student Counseling at Touro University California, for a very exciting educational episode on mental health, stigma, and maybe more. So Riva, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be a guest and I'm excited to do this.
So we are really excited to learn a little bit more from you. We know that you're very passionate about destigmatizing mental health. So could you go into this a little bit for us?
Yeah, actually, I can. I want to say that I probably became passionate about it from an early age, which I don't know what that's good or bad what it says about me, but I remember when I was in my first class for my master's program, the professor was rattling off statistics. So some of the statistics were that 80% of us probably came from a home of a depressed mom or a substance abuse using family. And I was like, how can he make such a statement? But when I got to know the class, he was really spot on accurate. And I could say I had 2 check marks in that category of having a parent that struggled with depression and drinking to self-medicate. And I remember being a child and knowing that something was wrong, but not really knowing how to help my mom, who was a really wonderful and passionate and artistic person, had so much to offer. But she grew up in a time where mental health was really foreign. It was something that could be, dangerous. You don't tell what's going on in the home. And before, kind of Oprah and where things were sort of brought to light. And I just realized how alone she was for all those years. And that's probably what was bothering her. Her siblings, later told me that there was a lot of trauma, that they grew up with a very, really dysfunctional background. And I think how different her life could have been had she had someone to talk to and let her know that she's not alone, or provide resources, or maybe the depression was, chemically based and there was some medication that could help, and that she could have been living her best life. So I think it started there. But then when I've gone on throughout my career, I've just been at Touro more recently, which is a little different than my past career, which has mostly been working with people that are very suspicious and resistant to mental health. And I'm not one to force things on people. So I had to come up with ways to educate and have open dialogue to sort of start destigmatizing mental health. So I would say that that's was kind of born with it. And then throughout my career, I mostly work with populations that were resistant to it. So I had to get good at explaining it so that I could give them the help that they needed.
Gosh, I have to say we get that a lot. I mean, yesterday we were at our community outreach event and, people come up, and I think that's, still very real in the community. And I think a lot of people, maybe hear mental health and they maybe have a different picture of what that means, or a very specific viewpoint. If you don't mind sharing, not to put you too much on the spot, but how did you navigate those conversations? Or do you have any advice for somebody who might be working with a family member who's going through that?
Absolutely. The first thing I always ask everybody is, what is your experience with mental health? And was it a good or bad experience? And so many people haven't had any experience with mental health, and their experience that they know of is what they see on television. And therapists are pretty boring, but on television, they have to spice it up, and they're usually psycho crazy people. So that doesn't help. And then other times, sometimes a lot of people can have the title counselor, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're trained. And
Right.
So they could have met with someone that's called a counselor, and in juvenile hall, they're called juvenile counselors, but they're not necessarily counselors. And so there's a lot of jobs that where someone has a title counselor where they weren't necessarily a counselor, and they had a bad experience.
Yeah.
So I want to always find what was that experience? If it's a kid that maybe they were taken away from their parents and put in foster home because they talked to the school counselor. So that, they said something to the counselor and they lost their whole family and they don't know why and feel responsible. So the first thing I always want to know is what's their experience? how was the experience? And then I explain a little bit about what I do. And I explain that they are really their own expert. And I believe that everybody is their own expert on what's best for you. What are your triggers? What are your challenges? Most people have a lot of insight on themselves. And so it's not me waving a magic wand or telling them to do something that they may not want to do. It's more of conversation. So that's usually kind of where I start with them.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I do a lot of outreach in the community. And I think there's still a video of me at Solano County, but I'll talk with them about, if I'm going to get visual for a moment, but if you had a big sore on your face and it smelled and there was pus coming out, and just think of the most disgusting thing, like from Dr. Pimple Popper. And if you're walking around with that, what would your family, your boss say, your friends say? And they'd say, you need to go to the hospital, you need to see an expert, you need to see the doctor. And they wouldn't tell you things like, oh, you need to go take an aspirin or go to CVS or have a drink. Or the famous one, calm down, it's not that serious.
Yeah.
That's not the type of feedback you would get. And because it's visual and people can see it. But when we're hurting on the inside, we're really good at covering that up. And our friends and family may not necessarily see that. So they're not giving us the advice or encouragement that's helpful. Things like that. Or I'll explain to them, if someone's diabetic, they might have to take some medication so that they're balanced and they can stay alive. And mental health problems can be similar, that sometimes you might need some medication or you might need counseling to help, balance things so that you can be functioning and thriving, at full throttle.
Riva, I wanted to ask you, what is something that as a community we can do to start really normalizing seeking mental health care? Because I think a lot of the times, like you were touching on, when it's something physical, we know to go to the doctor, but when it's something that's affecting us mentally, it's something that we tend to kind of shy away from. So is there anything as a community that we can do to work towards normalizing it and making people feel comfortable seeking help?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things is I don't think people talk enough about confidentiality. And so people don't realize that when you see a therapist, that confidentiality is it is drilled into us. It is the number one thing that we're supposed to maintain as a client's confidentiality. And we take that really, really seriously. So whatever they talk about isn't going to be revealed. If they're seeing a counselor, that can't even be revealed. If someone calls me and says, I have information about so-and-so, I have to say, I don't know who you're talking about, and I can't confirm or deny if I'm seeing them. There are limits to confidentiality, which is harm to self, harm to others, child abuse, and elder abuse. And any counselor is supposed to tell you that within the first few minutes of meeting with them. But you're really protected by that confidentiality. And so I think communicating that. I also think that the thing about social media has been really helpful. There's a lot of people, everyday folks that are out there putting on videos, talking about their personal experience, talking about counseling that really resonates with people. And that's helpful in bringing more people in. And then I think you have to get creative. You have to think, who am I trying to reach and what can I do to make them feel comfortable? And that might be doing outreach and asking them, but also trying to figure out things. For a long time, I worked with Solano County probation, and that's a very tough population to get into counseling for obvious reasons. Yeah. So one of the things that they did is hire me to work in the probation department. So they didn't have to go make a separate appointment. They didn't have to worry about having bus fare or transportation. And we're very lenient with, if they missed an appointment, I'm not going to cancel someone. So meeting the people where they're at. Some people aren't going to be able to be consistent, and there's going to be some no-shows, but that doesn't mean that they don't need help, and so making it accessible and easy and something that's useful for them.
Wow. No, that's so great. So you send out emails and some messages, and one thing we noticed about you is you have these great sayings like, I'm going to butcher this, like eyebrows on fleek, like mental health on fleek, but is there anything else you've heard that just stands out to you or kind of go-tos that maybe you could tell somebody like, oh, this works. Like, I'm just thinking of, we have navigators that work with people, but we also have a lot of family members and friends who call about their own family members and friends. So do you have any like nuggets of information or sayings that you've noticed just really help?
I do. Of course, I'm on the spot. I can't think of them, but
It's okay.
I'm getting a reputation at Touro. Some students told me that I guess they're friends, but I can't confirm or deny.
Right.
But
We won't ask.
They're calling them Riva-isms, but I do have a few. So the eyelashes on fleek was just that, you know, if you think about, we do a lot of maintenance these days. Like people get their eyelashes done, their nails done, and then you're always getting your oil changed. Even if you don't put your car in the shop for a regular tune-up, you do get your oil changed. And why? Because you don't want to end up broken down on the side of the freeway when you least expect it. And that's what happens with our mental health. And we, you know, we give all these attention to these other things, but really our minds and emotions deserve and need that type of maintenance. And I think people have a preconceived notion that therapy is this long-term commitment. And you have to lay on a couch and talk about some trauma that happened when you were 5. And it doesn't always have to be that way. You can customize it for you. You are the consumer and you're in control. So for example, when I was at Solano County, I would have some people that were resistant, but maybe they're a single parent and they're parenting completely alone. That's such an isolating experience. So I'd be like, okay, we can just talk about parenting stuff. And that became really valuable to them, that it was sort of a sounding board that they could run off, you know, I don't know what they, you know, disciplines they had with their kids or concern, or if their kid was struggling in school. And we could come up with a game plan on how to address that.
That's great.
So one of the things, I'll tell you one thing I can think of. I have a ton, but one of the things I tell when I work with young, well, not just young folks, but people in relationships that tend to be more on the empathic side, let's say, and caring, is my Yelp rule. If you're dating someone, and the Yelp rule is that if you went out to a restaurant and the food was nasty and the service was bad and the host was rude, you wouldn't leave, and your Yelp message wouldn't be, I think the cook is having a difficult relationship with his mom and is insecure, and the waitress might be having a bad day. You'd be like, this place, you know, stinks and the food is horrible. I wouldn't eat here again. So when you're starting a relationship, people should be putting their best foot forward. And if they deserve a bad Yelp review, then you should probably stick with that and not make excuses for them.
I love that. That's so great, because it's a tangible thing. That's great. I'm gonna have to remember that one.
Definitely something we could all apply to our life.
Just saying.
And Rita, was there anything else that you wanted to touch on that we didn't give you the opportunity to?
Yes. I'll say one more thing, if I never get invited back again, is that, and I learned this when I was at probation, but they just hired me to do counseling, but a lot of things go hand in hand. And so I will tie this together, but just bear with me. So when I talked in the beginning about my mom's experience, just seeing a counselor was intimidating for her, but it went beyond that. She was also afraid to go see a doctor. And I remember one year she was having some symptoms and she told me she went to like the free clinic and just had a checkup, which is huge for her. That must have meant that she probably wasn't feeling very good. And her blood work came back with the blood cell count wasn't quite right. And I remember her sharing that with me. I was like young at the time, like maybe 18 or something. So I told her she should probably go back. And then she never did go back. And then 5 years later, I get a call that she's in a hospital and she's about to have surgery. And it turned out she had colon cancer. And it actually ended up ending her life at the young age of 50. And colon cancer is the most treatable cancer there is. And probably had she followed through with it that first time, she'd still be alive today. And I don't say that to be like dramatic, but often if the fear of counseling also transfers over to your overall physical health, where some people are really bad at self-care. And so, but they are really interrelated. So when I was at probation, people also had, I was like, when was the last time you went to the doctor? So a lot of mental health symptoms sometimes aren't even mental health symptoms, they're physical symptoms. For example, if you have low vitamin D, which I saw a lot during the pandemic, that first year of the pandemic, people stopped going outside. And so I'd say like, hey, you know what? When they'd start telling me what was going on, I'd say, why don't you make an appointment, get a full blood panel? And lo and behold, they'd be low on vitamin D, or your thyroid hormone is huge. People can feel depressed or feel crazy. It makes you ruminate where you can't stop thinking about a worry. And it's not a mental health issue. It's literally a physical symptom. So I always encourage people, if you're concerned about a family member and you notice that behaviors are changing, that start with just a full blood panel and a basic medical appointment, and that can save so much trouble. And then the other thing with supporting family members is, I think it's just really important that when you have a problem and you talk to your friends, it can be helpful, it can be validating, but we also have those friends that or family members that you tell them something you're struggling with, and they think it's a time to play the one-up game. They're like, oh, if you think that's bad, girl, let me tell you what happened to me. And that can be fun, but if you're really struggling with something, it can shut a person down. So encouraging someone to go talk to someone that's a professional can be helpful, and say, I hear that you're struggling, and I really want to help you. I'm not sure that I can, but, I bet there's someone out there that could probably give you the support that you need. And people don't realize that when you go to a therapist, you are the consumer. You interview them. You can ask for a consultation, and you can ask them what their style is, and just get a chance to feel their vibe and see if that's someone that's worthy of your time, because you want someone that, you get along well, that you feel understands you and can give you the services that you deserve.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for adding that.
Well, Riva, we really appreciate you sharing with us and teaching us a little bit more about destigmatizing mental health. We're really hoping you come back for another episode.
Yeah.
And and we want to just remind everyone that if you're looking for other mental or emotional health resources and services, you can visit SolanoConnex, which is spelled CONNEX.org. Thank you again, Riva.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.